There is a lake in the American West that was once the largest body of fresh water west of the Mississippi. Today, you can walk where boats used to sail. The water is gone, not from drought alone, not from a single disaster, but from decades of decisions made by governments, corporations, and farmers who believed the supply would never run out. They were wrong. Right now, across the United States, aquifers that took 10,000 years to fill are being drained in a single generation. Cities are already rationing. Farms are already failing. And the people who manage America's water have known about this for years. They just didn't tell you. This isn't a warning about the future. This is a report on what is already happening, quietly, systematically, beneath the surface of a country that built its entire civilization on the assumption that the water would always be there. It won't. And the timeline is much shorter than anyone in power wants to admit. Most Americans turn on a faucet and never think about what's behind it. They assume the system works. They assume someone is managing it. They're half right. There is a system, but it is failing, and has been failing for longer than most people realize. Beneath the Great Plains of the United States lies one of the most important geological formations on Earth, the Ogallala Aquifer. It stretches across 8 states: Nebraska, Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma. It holds enough water to fill Lake Huron. For decades, it was treated like a savings account with no bottom. Farmers drilled wells. Cities drew from it. Industries depended on it. And for a while, it seemed limitless. It is not limitless. Hydrologists began measuring the decline in the 1960s. By the 1980s, the data was undeniable. In some parts of Texas, the aquifer has already lost more than half its water. In certain counties, it is effectively gone. Farmers who built their entire operations around those wells have watched them go dry one by one. Some sold their land. Some walked away entirely. Some waited, hoping the water would somehow return. It doesn't return. Not on any time scale that matters to a human life. The Ogallala recharges at roughly half an inch per year. It is being drained at several feet per year. The math is not complicated. And yet, for decades, no federal law has limited how much any single user can extract. Anyone with a well and a pump can take as much as they want. That decision, or rather, that failure to decide, is about to cost this country in ways most people are completely unprepared for. In 2012, the United States experienced the worst drought in half a century. Crops failed across the Midwest. Livestock died in the fields. The economic damage reached into the tens of billions. But here is what the news didn't focus on. The drought didn't cause the water crisis. It revealed it. The aquifer was already in serious decline before a single cloud disappeared from the sky. The drought simply pulled back the curtain on a problem that had been building for generations. And the people who knew, the hydrologists, the agricultural scientists, the regional water managers, had been writing reports about it for years. Those reports sat in filing cabinets. They were presented at conferences. They were submitted to state legislatures. And almost nothing was done. Because the people with the power to act were the same people profiting from the extraction. In Kansas, a group of farmers were shown projections in the early 2000s demonstrating that their wells would run dry within their own lifetimes. Some of them changed their practices. Most did not. One farmer, interviewed by a regional water authority, said something that stuck with the researchers in the room. He said the water would outlast him. So it wasn't his problem. That farmer's well went dry in 2018. He was still alive. But the crisis runs deeper than individual wells. Because while farmers in small towns were draining the aquifer from below, something else was happening above ground. Something larger. Something that most Americans have never once considered. The water that flows through American rivers. The water that feeds reservoirs, that supplies cities, that keeps the West alive, was being divided up and sold off nearly 100 years ago. And the contracts written then are still in effect today. In 1922, 7 states sat down and divided the Colorado River. Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming. They calculated how much water flowed through it annually and split that number between them. The problem is, they got the number wrong. The measurements were taken during an unusually wet period. The actual long-term flow of the Colorado was significantly lower than what they put in the agreement. They divided water that didn't fully exist, and for decades it didn't matter. The river was massive. The population was manageable. The system held together. Then the cities grew. Las Vegas expanded into the desert. Phoenix became one of the fastest-growing metros in America. Los Angeles kept building, and every one of those cities was drawing from the same river, based on the same century-old math that was wrong from the beginning. Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States, sits on the Colorado River. At full capacity, it holds enough water to supply the entire country for 2 years. In 2022, it dropped to 27% capacity. Boat ramps that once sat at water level were now sitting 60 feet above it, the white mineral ring left on the canyon walls. Researchers began calling it the bathtub ring, marked exactly how far the water had fallen. It was visible from miles away. A geological record of consumption. But here is the detail that changes everything. Even at that historic low, states were still legally entitled to draw their full allocation. The contracts said so. And then a new player entered the equation, one that nobody in 1922 had thought to account for. One that now controls more water rights in the American West than some entire states. In the early 2000s, investment firms began buying something most people had never thought of as a commodity: water rights, not water itself. The legal right to use it. In the American West, water rights are property. They can be bought, sold, and transferred like shares in a company. And quietly, systematically, hedge funds and private investment groups began acquiring them. One firm alone purchased water rights across Colorado, California, and Arizona, covering hundreds of thousands of acre-feet annually. That is enough water to supply millions of households. And it is sitting in a private portfolio. Some of it is leased back to farmers. Some of it is sold to municipalities at a premium. Some of it is simply held, appreciating in value as the scarcity grows. Water is becoming what oil once was. A resource wars are fought over. A resource that determines which cities survive and which ones slowly collapse. But the privatization of water rights is only one part of the problem. Because while investors were buying up legal claims, something physical was happening underground. In Arizona, the land itself began to sink. Geologists call it subsidence. When aquifers are drained, the rock and sediment above them can collapse inward. In some parts of the Phoenix metro area, the ground has sunk by more than 18 feet over the last century. Cracks appeared in roads. Foundations shifted. Infrastructure built on the assumption of stable ground began to show the strain. And here is what made researchers go quiet when they looked at the data more carefully. The sinking is permanent. Even if the aquifer somehow refilled, the geological structure that once held it no longer exists in the same form. The damage cannot be undone. And Phoenix is not alone. Cities across the American West are now in a race they cannot afford to lose. Las Vegas recycles nearly 90% of its indoor water use. It has ripped out millions of square feet of decorative grass. It has paid residents to remove their lawns. By any measure, it is doing more than almost any other city in America. And it is still not enough. Because Las Vegas sits at the end of the line. It draws from Lake Mead, and Lake Mead is still falling. In 2023, the federal government did something it had never done before. It told states they would have to take less. Mandatory cuts to Colorado River allocations. Arizona lost a significant portion of its supply overnight. Farmers in the Central Arizona Project were told their water would be reduced before their crops were in the ground. Some of those farms did not survive the season. But the cuts were still not proportional to the actual deficit. The math still doesn't balance. Scientists who have studied the Colorado Basin say that even with current conservation efforts, the system is being used faster than it can recover. There is no version of the current model that ends without a reckoning. The only question is timing, and who bears the cost. Small towns will feel it before cities do. Farmers will feel it before suburbs do. The communities with the least political power will run dry first. That has already begun. In rural New Mexico, Some communities are trucking in water because their local supply is gone, not in a future projection. Right now, this is not a crisis approaching on the horizon. It is a crisis already underway, visible, measurable, and undeniable to anyone willing to look at the data without flinching. The water that built the American West is running out, and the systems designed to manage it were never built to handle this moment. They were built for abundance. Abundance is over. If this kind of reporting matters to you, the stories that don't make the front page but shape the world you live in, consider subscribing. There is more to cover, and not much time to waste.